And we are live. Hey, everybody out there. Nerdark Ted here, for Nerds by Nerds. With me is Nate the Nerdark. And
Greetings.
we're going to do some GM 911s. We're going to talk some nerdy stuff and, do our usual hangout stuff. So, how's things going, Nate?
Oh, pretty good. I stayed up a little too late last night, but I'm ready to rock.
All right. So, we'll jump right into, our first GM 911 that we're gonna cover today. So we received an email from William, and he wants to run a mega dungeon. Now, this is no little, I want to run this over the course of a couple of sessions. I want to run this, as a long-term thing. He's talking about running this as a level 1 to 20 campaign. Players fall in, game is over when you get out. Now, I don't know how much experience you might have of something like this, but I've never done anything like that.
Well, I've run dungeons before, but not one that goes all the way like from 1st to 20th. But I would say something to bring up is his mega dungeon is kind of like a living creature in a way, and
Right.
I think it's like its own plane of existence, like a demi-plane.
Right, and that's kind of where I was going to go, and it's a little weird to have this kind of thing because, like, as the players level, you have to be able to ramp up the difficulty. So, is it like, do you do it as like a number of floors, and when you clear the floor, that's when you level?
Yeah, you know what? I feel like this is going to be one of those if he just watches like 5 or 6 different anime that do this, then he would be fine. Because it's like this idea: you're going to enter a dungeon, or you're actually entering a different dimension, so you can't escape without escaping through the means that the dungeon's going to allow you. And from what I understand, he also wanted it to kind of be this like entertainment of the gods in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where they have mortals, go through this for their own entertainment and interest.
Right.
So I think a big challenge is going to be having it not just be slashing and killing and looting and stuff, and puzzles, and have it be more of perhaps. I would include things such as there are entities inside the dungeon who are trying to figure out how to get out without completing it, because maybe it's just too dangerous for them, or they don't have what is necessary to get out. Because it sounds like fun, but I think 20 levels of just fighting through levels is going to be really boring.
Well, so there are some people who their sole entertainment in this hobby is, I want to kill stuff. The combat aspect of it is what is appealing to them, and who am I to lay a judgment on them? And I've gamed with plenty of them. I know at one point in time the combat was much more important to me than the role playing. Now I have evolved or changed focus or whatever you want to say, but the role playing now is more important to me than let's go fight stuff.
Well, I'm not judging that. I'm just saying I would be completely bored by like 15th or 16th level.
But that's because that's your play style. So
exactly. And I would say, unless he's got a whole bunch of people who just want to just monster slog through 20 levels, then he should probably have something else in there. And one of the things I would suggest is story arcs that happen within the constraint of the dungeon. Like if a whole bunch of different powerful creatures were trapped in here, some of them like Illithids, they're not going to want to stay. They're going to want to try to figure out how to get out, especially if they've been stuck in there as kind of like the alien factor in like the surprise, like, hey, there's Illithids in here. You thought they were in space.
Right.
Or, like in the Underdark, well, this is a dungeon. It's not really the Underdark. It's a plane of existence. So you're kind of in this situation. The one thing I like about the plane of existence, well, the biggest thing I like about the plane of existence aspect is that it's not like, oh, the entrance conveniently collapsed and you can't get out. They're like, well, no, I'll just sit here and dig for the next week and then I'll get out. But, when you're like, oh, you're stuck in a different plane of existence and you do not have the ability to leave, even by magical means, except through the exit
Yeah,
okay, yeah, I'm in here.
you've got some sort of planar binding on you that is immune to the typical spells that even if I get high enough level, I'm just going to cast this. No, it's the dungeon. There's something about the ambient area that just prevents that kind of thing, short of the pre-programmed exit. So what I would do is I would kind of make this as so much as a living dungeon, but a living world, so that everything that's here, it needs to eat. So do you. You need to be able to find your resources. Well, so do the things that are living there. So you mentioned in his actual GM 911 about putting in resources that the players would be able to find, so that they would be able to have sustenance and live, and that's part of the challenge beyond the just getting out.
Well, the thing about a magical planar dungeon like this is you could have one entire level be food, like a forest that's just filled with berries and stuff, and terrible monsters that are going to eat you. With this, with that aspect, as well as that could be an entire thing, is the survivability of people in there and how everybody gets access to different food sources. So some people, like monsters, might just eat people and eat things, and that's how they get fed. Other beings. So I would break this dungeon down into like 4 or 5 factions. Some of them being like a lich or a beholder, or a contingent of knights or something, like hell knights or something. And then you have these situations that they're going to get into. And another thing I would include is the idea of being able to get access to food, and then the final faction would be one of the factions that I would suggest would be just like generic monsters. So you have like basically the gods throwing in just monsters to fight that aren't relevant to anything. They're just like summoned goblins or a summoned basilisk or something. They're not. You don't have to figure out ecology for them. They're just, I popped into existence because the gods willed it. I mean, they made this whole demiplane, so that's why.
Right.
But I would also have people that are like more intelligent creatures that are put in that have to deal with trying to also escape this dungeon, and probably aren't going to be friendly about it.
So the great part is if you have this living world, you have the ability to put in NPCs, potential allies, people that can be rescued, former adventurers, people who have been finding a way to survive here that could help the players out, or at least minimum provide some kind of role-playing experience, on each level, or every other, depending upon what the what the kind of experience the players really are looking for at the table. And this way you still can do that typical, the 3 pillars of D&D. Now, William does have a couple questions or problems that he sees, doing this whole plan. And the first and foremost is the thing that I think a lot of newer GMs deal with, and that's the concept of murder hobo. And we've done a handful of videos on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would just go to look towards them. But honestly, if your players can't handle doing role playing and not killing everything, then maybe this isn't the game for them. Because any game you're going to run, you always need to make sure you've got player buy-in. And honestly, if for me, if somebody's like, oh well, that's all I'm into, then I'm like, well, I'm not going to GM for that, because that's not the kind of games I enjoy running.
Yeah, I would agree that you're going to have to get player buy-in on like what they want this dungeon to be, to a certain extent, because they're going to be playing with it for a while. Even if you give them a level a session, it's still 20. It's still 20 sessions.
Right.
So, and then there's boons after that. So technically, you can do even more. But if you're going to be playing like 6 to 8 hour sessions and gaining a level each time, that's like 160 hours you're looking at.
Yep.
So I would definitely want player buy-in for 160 hours of playtime, not even thinking about work and stuff.
Right.
For it.
So then, William's second question is he's got a player who generally only spends about 5 or 6 levels on a character before he gets bored you know, and then he's like, oh, I want to go do something else. So this is another one where, you know, if you don't have player buy-in, is this really something that's going to work for that particular player? But I do have a couple thoughts on it.
I do as well.
Do you want to go first?
Yes. Well, there is a really neat race. I'll call it a race. I don't remember exactly if you classified it as a race. That was on our website, nerdarchy.com, called the Vessel. And that basically was, it's like an entity that can store spirits of people that have passed. And what it is basically, oh, you're at first level and you're this wizard. Well, in 5 levels, that wizard leaves the vessel and somebody else comes in. And you're playing now a 5th or 6th level character based on the levels of the party, and going through the rest of the adventure, however far you want, with that class and that character. And the idea is that it's the god's way of giving a spirit like a heroic spirit one last huzzah before it goes off to the afterlife. And the only thing I would change from the way it's written is that the original author had random rolls to see what level you could come out as, and I would say that that doesn't really fly with 5th edition from my perspective. So I'd just say have it be consistent levels similar to everybody else. So if the 5th level wizard leaves, never to return again, and now you have a cleric at 5th level, and everyone gains 6th level, then it now is 6th level, and then you would just go on. And at 7th or 8th level, when he plays it once, like, cleric was a mistake, let's do a different character. He is still this vessel. Everyone still sees this vessel, but it's a different persona within it. And I like that aspect about it. And I also liked it pretty much for the idea that if you have one of those players that just doesn't stick with the game or stick with a character for very long, it gives, basically it gives them an opportunity to do what they want to do and not disrupt your game.
That is a really good point, Nate. And I had a lot of good thoughts about the vessel concept when it first showed up on the website, but it kind of I wasn't thinking about that for this particular example, but that's definitely a good way to handle this particular player. Like, that would just be his race all the time. Like, okay, well, I'm going to play this, and whenever I feel like making a change, I would say give it at least 2 or 3 sessions before you switch. But you've got a reason why a player can roll up somebody new. So for me, I would, of course, talk to the player. If the vessel idea doesn't fly for you, I would talk to the player and say, hey, look, this is the concept of what we're doing for the game. Are you going to be able to handle that? And if the answer is no, then what you could certainly have is you could have other options of other NPCs that are in there, and you could allow the player a death scene, or you could have the character go mad or suffer some kind of fate that would allow that character to be unable to continue, and the NPC that they meet further in that wasn't able to succeed, his party died some years ago, and he's just kind of been hanging out in this NPC zone, and then he's able to join the party. And he's technically already gone through the earlier levels. He's of course the same level as the party, so no issues there. I think that's the way I would probably handle it.
Yeah, and he would have similar understandings of the dungeon, having gone past the previous levels as well. And Mike Gould made a suggestion about getting basically him into participating in that particular character. And there's a lot of different videos we go into, like hooking a character on an adventure, and also like designing an adventure that's going to incorporate that character so that they have buy-in. And if the GM's not doing that, yes, then use that strategy. But if all strategies fail and the person's just like, well, yeah, I've played this for a while, it's the hot new thing, and now I'm done. Now I want to play an Undying Light, an Undying Light or Shadow Sorcerer or something, and you go, okay, well, here. He could be like, maybe he's like the group playtester. I know we have a person that reads, their hobby is reading RPG books and stuff and getting into it and seeing like what's new and what's interesting. And if that's the way they like to enjoy life, then 5 or 6 levels is all they got for something new. And then they're like, yep, and now I would like to know about something else that's new. And in D&D, there's always something new to play or make up or create or experience. So
especially if you're willing to look at third-party stuff as well.
Oh yeah,
because I mean, there's always stuff over in the DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG. So, did you have any other ideas to deal with the character who wants to change characters, or the player wants to change characters, too often?
No, I think that's about it. It's going to have to be one of those options, or figure out something that they actually stick with. They could be super. I mean, this person's probably, I'm assuming, like one of the type of people that does this is a person who's super excited to make a new character. And 3 or 4 levels out, they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then 5 or 6 levels out, they're like, it's not as cool as Rune Master or whatever, or not as cool as, the gun alchemist. What is as cool as that? So
absolutely.
If that showed up in the game and I was allowed to play it, I'd be like, that would be really interesting to not for my particular character I play. But if I was playing a different character I wasn't so thrilled with, I'd be like, can I make a gun alchemist instead? So if that's that personality of the person, no amount of trying to get them interested in that particular character, because they gain disinterest the amount of time they play them. So right. So that's if you have that type of person, you're most likely not going to sway them with trying to hook them back in.
So we have
that's it.
I believe Ivan left the chat. I don't know if he's still listening, but he put up a question: do we have any ideas for an expanded Wild Magic Surge table?
Expanding it?
Yeah. So basically, if you play a Wild Magic Sorcerer, you're running to that table over and over and over again. Eventually you're getting the same results.
How many inns can you burn down with a fireball before it's like, okay, I've had enough of this fireball thing?
So I know in the early days of Nerdarchy, we were talking about making, new and interesting tables, possibly based off of terrain or any of that kind of stuff. Did we ever actually create any of those or do anything with any of those?
We have an urban wild mage table. And
was that a Patreon reward, or was that
you know what? I would not know if it made it into the Patreon rewards, because I wasn't always doing them. But right. I know I have somewhere an urban wild mage table.
All right, so Ivan, we've got something. We'll find it and figure out what's going on with it, and see what Nerdarchy is going to wind up doing with it.
Yeah, maybe we'll stow it in the upcoming Patreon rewards.
So Bobby has a question. It says, when my blade singer starts his blade song, my DM says I start dancing in a feminine way, and that's what boosts my AC. I'm not comfortable with this. What should I do?
A feminine way?
That's what the chat says, my friend.
Oh, I wasn't reading the chat. So, okay. Well, I'm gonna say that there's graceful dancers that are very, very manly. So if your character's like, hey, I'm a male elf and I want to be manly in my blade singing, then looking graceful and elegant is different than the descriptor feminine, I guess. You know what I mean? So
right. There's 2 things that I see here in this question. Number one, it sounds, and I could be wrong, but it sounds like the DM is trying to be a jerk just to be a jerk.
Well, there is that possibility.
And there's always problems like that. And we both have got many years experience at playing and running, and I'm certain we've both had those jerk DMs where, all right, this is the way it goes, and as the DM you really can't argue with them. So like I would start off a conversation and be like, well, why do you feel this has to be a feminine thing? Like I envision, a blade singer, because I've actually played one in 2nd and early 3rd edition, as a character who literally moves gracefully around the battlefield, and he's constantly has his sword in motion so that you never know where it's going to strike. Now, I've seen ballet and I've seen, male ballet dancers that, yeah, you might say some of those moves might be a little feminine, but those guys are powerful to be able to do the things that they're doing. And I wouldn't want to be like, hey, dude, man, that's, insert insult here. I just wouldn't want to go down that road. Now, if your DM is being a jerk, that's just being a jerk. If he's just has his interpretation and you have yours, you could just sit back and say, well, this is what I envision. Can you tell me why you're envisioning something different? And have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think the DM might be confusing graceful and elegant dancing with that elves would do, because they are both graceful and elegant, with feminine qualities instead of just simply like a neutral concept. Because, I mean, a male dancer that can lift two women up at once while he's dancing and walk around with them, I mean, that's still graceful. He's doing it. It's not like they're dead weights and he's tossing them up in the air at some muscle competition. He's doing it in a graceful manner. So that's what I have to say about that. Is like, I think he might need to expand his understanding of vocabulary.
So, TrueMate wants to know if you're familiar with the Tome of Beasts. I was thinking of incorporating the arena in a forest setting, but finding it hard to think of an initial meeting for the party. I'm not overly familiar with them, but thankfully he put in a tagline of their small hedgehog people. So if you were running a game and you wanted to incorporate this race into the world, but have the players discover them as a race, how would you go about doing it, Nate?
I'm thinking that perhaps a valley that might have, maybe it has dangerous things around it, or it's really hard to get to, so it's not really, settled by anybody. Or I would say they might discover the race to the general populace, but maybe a tribe that lives in this, valley that no one else is hanging out with knows about them known about them for a while.
Right.
But so then you probably also discover a tribe of people that have not had contact with people for a while. So I would say it's like one of those situations where you might not be the first to discover it, but you're the first to. No one in the group knows about them, nor does anybody. Like if you looked in a book in a library, it does not have anything about them. So you would be discovering them for your culture or your area.
It's possible others have encountered them. It's not like they're a new race that was just born, but you're going to be the one to bring it to society.
Yeah, and I would say they either, you've got underground as an area you can put stuff like that. There's deep forest that the elves aren't around that area, or something like a section of forest that's just like jungles, very easy to hide stuff in biologically. There's all kinds of tiers to jungles. So you could have the hedgehogs in the underbrush, which is like under the forest mulch most of the time, to like escape some kind of terrible birds and things. There's like all these different ways you do it, as well as like a hidden vale someplace. So there might be only like several thousand of them in existence, and they all live in this like, crater valley or something. That, like I said, is difficult to get to. And it's kind of far off the path. So if they were on an adventure, like, oh, you need to go to this mountain spire, and they find this valley on the way, and be like, oh, I've never heard of these things before, and I've never seen them anywhere. So like you would be discovering them for the current generation of people, because maybe a traveler or a merchant came by, but he didn't write it down. He didn't tell anybody. So, or maybe he died, before he told anybody.
Another way, if you wanted the discovery to be the big thing and not a something on the way, you could literally have an NPC who claims like, hey, I've heard of these things, I want to see one. Or if you've got anyone in your party that's really interested in that meeting of new cultures, or that kind of thing, you could lay the groundwork of, there's something out there who's willing to actually go and see whether these things are, hostile or friendly, if they exist, if they don't exist. Depending upon what kind of players you have, you could lay it down as this is an absurd rumor, or this is out there. You just have to go find it and let the players actually go do it. And if you're dealing with these guys being from a big city and their settlement isn't more than a month's journey away, then you could potentially have like, oh well, is there someone that's willing to travel from the arena to the actual city to see the other side of the world, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I'm done with that topic. Are you cool with being done with the topic?
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
You said your thing, I said my thing. I think that covers it.
Okay, we have some stuff in the chat. Adam Foisey, I have a player that plays a Dampier, or how would you just say it, half vampire from Cobalt Press, and wants to embrace the blood-sucking aspect. How would you go about putting in blood spells in the 5e, i.e. like costs, hit dice to cast, and that kind of stuff? I wrote up a blood mage for the Lost Lore for a few months back in the Patreon rewards, and what I did was basically I made a sorcerer archetype based off of like the power of the blood, and I didn't actually have any spells, but I had things that you could augment things. Almost like sorcery points, but you were using your hit dice to fuel it, or hit points. Most of the case, it was hit dice. So that was kind of the way I went about it. So particular blood magic spells, I would just probably look at other editions that have that kind of stuff. Or you can say, well, there's spells in the DMG that, I mean, in the player's handbook that you like, for example, and you're like, well, if I change the damage type to necrotic, and just say, oh, well, your blood is ripped from your body or whatever, or like Vampiric Touch is a good example of a spell that is good how it is. So you make sure you're using those kind of spells, and if you want to go along with the kind of becoming a full vampire, you'd have things like Enthrall, or you'd have Charm Person and stuff like that. So taking particular spells like that, I think could lend towards being a type of blood mage. But particular blood spells, I would just like take the exact damage and the exact targeting ability of another power, like Melf's Acid Arrow. Melf's Acid Arrow can just be converted to necrotic. You strike like I don't know, like use your own blood to infect and disease another person, and then they take damage over time, like Melf's Acid Arrow. All you did was just take the spell and change it, and that way you don't have to worry about damage balance, or if I change it from one target to 2, does it change it? Just change the damage type and the descriptor, and you've got blood spells.
So, while the pick says, what are the components that make a fun game of D&D?
Well, that's going to be the type of fun you like to have.
I think this one really comes down to the players at the table, and it can always be a challenge, because I know that there's players in my game that run the entire gamut of the 3 pillars. Now, D&D is built on that, exploration, interaction, and combat. And if you wind up working with all of those, then the average gamer is going to find that fun. So you have to, see, okay, well, if you're doing all of them and there's times that your players are sitting there falling asleep, or have that bored look on their face, then that means whatever pillar you're currently working on, they're really not into. So you have to, look at that and say, okay, well, is everyone not into what's going on right now, or just a portion of the players? So, that is the biggest challenge of a DM, is supplying the game that your players are really going to be into. And Nate's still muted, so I'll keep
Yeah,
going.
I was trying. Sorry, I was like failing at clicking on the mute button. Yeah. Okay, so I would say components of a successful game, or what you need in your game, is basically things that are going at the base, that something that's going to gain interest and interaction from the players. That's going to be different at different tables, like Ted was talking about. But yeah, if you're not getting the attention of the group when you're the dungeon master, or if you're a player and everybody at the table is just like off doing something else and that's what you notice, then what's happening at the table is not what needs to happen for that kind of like a successful game component of the game. And I found that because of the type of play, like in Ted's game, the type of play that Ted does, I'm rarely bored, and I'm rarely like, oh, I wish I was like taking a nap or doing something else. So, I mean, it's happened once or twice where I've been like, okay, I am done with this conversation. I hope these guys get done soon because I am finished talking and listening about this stuff. So there are some times, but it's not like it's not because I want to go fight something. It's because I was just like, there's just in real life, there's conversations you get into and you say to yourself, okay, I would like to get out of this. Not because I have something else to do, because I am done talking about this subject, or I'm done talking with this person, or, like I would like to do 0 things rather than what I'm doing right now. So when you can say that, you're kind of like frustrated with what's actually happening. Not necessarily because it's not like, oh, we're rolling dice, or, oh, we're, exploring this dungeon. But, if you get bored with the conversation, I would say, just bow out of it. And if it's still going on in a few minutes, you like cut in some way that's going to kind of move it along. But same thing with combats. It's like there's certain times where it's just like, hey guys, can we all just get together and think about what we're going to do and do it when our turn comes up, rather than decide when everything is said and done. Now, I've had stuff in defense of being that kind of character that has to stop. When you've got to look through all these different spells because you're trying to figure out how to save the party, it can be kind of bothersome. But when you get that stumbling block, sometimes I find it's best to just move your initiative and say, I'm just holding my initiative until later. And that lets everybody continue to move on with the combat. So there's that other thing that can hold it up. So, but exploration, I guess, if you don't like exploring things that you've never seen before, or like never imagined before, then, that can kind of hold you up. So talking about the 3 pillars, there's going to be people who are not interested in the 3 pillars in even amounts.
Right.
So you can't just say, oh, these components are good for a game. But I would say at the end, you need personal player interest in what's going on at the table, as well as DM interest in what's going on at the table.
That is always true, and a lot of people do forget that the DM has to want to do what's going on. So we've actually just crossed our halfway point a couple minutes ago. So let's do a roll call, and while you guys are doing that, Wildapix wants to know how can he be as smart as you, Nate?
Oh, I see, because I answered his question right after he asked it without looking.
Yes.
Reading books, because reading is fundamental.
Nice. Serious question. I've answered this many times, but Luminex wants to know, how much prep do you do for a session as a DM?
Yeah, I was going to say, because Ted and Dave pretty much do none. I found that for fan games and live streams nowadays, I really actually enjoy kind of mapping stuff out and writing descriptions for things. And that's just a guide in case I stumble. It just helps me with like being anxious about being a DM. I don't have to worry about things if stuff's written down. So I like that kind of like a note card aspect where it's like, oh, you're in this cavern. These are the things I could describe if people look for them. These are the things I could describe if they search for them. And then I can go from there with that. So that's kind of what I like to start with. And that can take several hours. So really do it in your spare time when you're like, oh, I've got to wait for another customer and I'm a cashier, or I've got, time on my way to work.
Sitting in traffic.
Sitting in traffic. My best friend for a while, when I was driving up to meet to hang out with my not yet wife, I was driving 2.5 hours to go hang out with her up at her place because she didn't live around the area. She lived many hours away from college. So when I want to go up to hang out with her, I'd have 5 or 6 hours every weekend in the car. So I have several hundred hours of voice recordings of book ideas and conversations and dialogue between different NPCs and characters that I have in my head about playing. And I've got those marked. So if I'm like, oh, well, I want to get this description. I had this really cool idea for a dungeon back in whatever. I'm going to go check it out and listen to it. And that also can kind of inspire you for further writing and further creativity. So if you build like a bank of different dungeons and adventures in your mind and different character portrayals, that will get you closer to being able to just kind of do stuff on the fly. And before that, I would say, just write down those different character portrayals or save them in some manner, like a verbal voice recording. And that's how I would go about it. I forget what the question was, so I hope I answered it.
How much time do you spend doing prep?
Oh, so prep, yeah, a few hours, based on like an hour for every 4 hours a game.
All right, so we have Nordic Dragon 89 in Dalarna, Sweden. AJ Kinney in Lopez Island, Washington. We have Lincoln in Linkoping, Sweden. Evil Silly Putty in Minnesota. Poison is Kuwait in the house. Jason Sinclair in Kentucky. Mike Gould in Nova Scotia, Canada. Adam in Kansas City, Missouri. Wilder Smith in New York. Declan in Richmond, California. Tesmic in Australia. Todd in Dallas, Texas. Or Tatooine. They kind of feel the same this time of year. Robert Morris in Northern Michigan. Kyle in Earth Sol System. HD Dashwood in Hamburg, Germany. Wildepix in Canada. And Luminex in Appleton, Wisconsin. Kyle Russell in Nevada. Beamers RQ in Redmond, Washington today. Indy tomorrow. And then Starcrafter 13 Terrain in Bowling Green, Ohio. And I believe at this point in time, we've got a Dave en route to Gen Con.
Woohoo!
Which is why it's Nate and I, and not Dave and whatever have you.
Yeah, Dave is our traveling convention goer now, since he is our employee.
But going back to the actual question at hand in regards to campaign prep or session prep, I think a lot of it has to do, for me, with what is the game, what is going on. With a long-standing game like mine that's been running for over 30 sessions, it's something where there's always back burner thought that's thinking about, well, what am I going to do next session, several sessions from now? So there might be a lot of work that's built up now. Like I might spend a couple hours thinking about the overall thing, but then when it comes time to, oh, well, what am I doing on this next specific session? I honestly might jot down a couple ideas, or might not even have anything written down, but just in my head of, okay, well, I want to do this. Like I've got something big planned, planned all in my head. There's literally nothing written down about what I want to do for the next session. Well, we were supposed to have a session this past weekend. Everybody was busy doing one thing or another. I only had a couple players. I actually got injured, so I wasn't really up to running in addition to all of this. So I actually had to cancel the game. And I was stuck okay, well, do I run with 2 players and me being hurt, or do I and have to sideline my initial thought, because there was no way I could do what I want to do with only two players there. This is more of a, I want everybody at the table to see this, experience it, and what have you. But there's always thought, and leading up to it, I toyed around back and forth, like, all right, end of the last session, it's like, okay, you guys are teleporting back to the middle of Griffin Gaff, where something may or may not be happening. And I left a cliffhanger there on purpose because I still was not rock solid on what I wanted them to see when they open their eyes after the teleport. There could be nothing, or there could be something that's, amazing, bad, catastrophic, whatever have you. I think I'm pretty solid, locked in on what I want to do, but I just couldn't do that with 2 players.
And you recognize, Ted, that you were going to have a certain allotment and thought required for that time block that we completed. And then you're like, oh, and then I'll just leave it open-ended and end after this little segment is done. And then, that way you're not trying to think, oh, I've got to plan the next 7 sessions because I don't know how long we're going to play for XYZ day.
And that is always a challenge. There are some times where I am in the zone, and a handful of the players, they can completely remember, like, all right, it's 1 o'clock, I'm amped and ready to go on to the next thing, and the players are like, I've got work in 7 hours, can we stop now? And I was like, oh crap, I didn't realize it was 1 a.m. I was there, I was in the zone. And there's other times where I'm like, all right, I'm not feeling it today. I didn't do as much idea prepping as I would normally do, or the players really didn't latch on to what I put out. So therefore, like, I've got to do more in the fly when I'm already tired or stressed out or what have you. And you wind up getting in a funk, and it's like, all right, well, it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock. I'm just going to call it here. Hopefully the next session will run better. Even veterans of DMs, they have times where just sessions are just not going to go as you planned. That you're not going to be as ready, as you want to be. No matter what you do, players are always going to be ready to throw you for a loop, because you can't possibly think what every single player at the table is going to think and act upon based on what you give them.
Yeah, and you're always going to have the players that, I think it was mentioned in the chat, that will take up 10 minutes talking with a prisoner or an NPC that you're like, he has nothing. Like,
it was a throwaway.
He's got a name and a occupation, and that is it. And he's dressed in kind of torn up clothes. That's all you wanted to know about him. He is like, a wall in the background. He's a background character that doesn't really do anything except placeholder. He's an extra. And a player decides to talk to him for 10 minutes because he liked his hat or something. You're like, oh gosh. So yeah, when you're running a tight schedule, like an online game or something like that, or you only have a few hours, then that can really soak up time. So like, I think Kyle suggested it, that you take a 3-hour session, you say, oh well, 2.5 hours is I'm going to plan for, because the PCs are going to do their PCing thing and soak up that other half hour. Now, there's some times where combats last too long, and as a DM, you always have the power to shorten it. You don't always have to have. I mean, what if the creature was already kind of wounded or didn't actually have the hit points that are suggested in the Dungeon Master's Guide? Or you just say, oh well, it already used this attack today, so it doesn't have this spell ready or whatever, to make it weaker and make it a faster fight. Those are all things that you can include. I mean, that you can subtract from a monster when you're like, this final battle is lasting like 3 times longer than I thought it was. We're already over, and I've got like, everybody's got stuff to go to, but you don't want to just cut it there. So, there's certain times, like, you got to do time management, where if the battle's going to be like a half hour and you've only got a half hour left, well, just be prepared to like trim it up, that battle a little bit up, if somebody has things that take too long.
So when it comes to like one shots, and typically like we're doing for fan games or what have you, those things can either take more time or less time. I like to think that I'm a decent DM. I almost always have people telling me, it was fun and enjoyable to be in the game, and I've run games completely on the fly. I took time to come up with a an idea of what the game is going to be about, and voila, I give them the idea, and we run with the game. There's other times where I'll actually sit and think like, okay, well, I want to use this monster and I want to use this kind of puzzle. I'm going to actually formulate this map. I have a game coming up this Sunday afternoon for fans. I will be reaching out to Patreon later this afternoon to get players. So be on the lookout if you're a Patreon supporter. Look out, first 4 people that actually respond, because out of the 10 people that I emailed, I got 2 responses, and one of them was, "Yeah, I can't make it."
Wow.
So, but at this point in time, I actually have done 0 work other than what level the game is at. So I'm like, well, if I do a 6th level game, that gives people, this level of power, but I have no thought patterns at this point in time what I want to do with it. Am I going to work in an area that we've already played in? Do I want to work in an area that is completely undiscovered? I'm still up in the air on it. My kids are going to visit the in-laws, for the rest of the week later on this afternoon. So I'm gonna actually get some more breathing room in very soon. So I'll actually be able to have time to put some serious thought into what I want to do. But I I am planning to prep for this one, but I always get scared when I actively do prepping, because for the actual main game, the last time I actually put a significant amount of prep in, the players at my regular table were like, "Yeah, it was all right. They had fun, but it wasn't as good as the stuff that I just completely improv." So it's always bizarre fighting with that mindset in my head.
Oh yeah, that you could do 4 hours of work for prepping for a game and it not be as good as a half hour of just thinking about it and then going with whatever the heck you had.
Right.
Yeah, that's just sometimes, and I think that is helped in a way by the PCs and the players, how they all interact together. Because I mean, you let us loose in Griffingraph, Ted, as our guys that we've been together for 3 years playing, and we will soak up the entire session if you just let us go. We would be researching stuff at the library. We would be going down and eating at the local inn and talking. We would be doing all this other kind of stuff, except like going off and killing a monster.
But if left to those devices, I guarantee you, if the entire table is present, there's 2 players that are going to be sitting there rolling their eyes at me because they want combat.
Well, yeah, and we both know who those players are, but so there's plenty of stuff to be done. So when you've got characters like that, it's a lot easier, I think, to wing it. So if you've got players that are new to new to D&D, or new to playing, or just aren't extrovert enough to command the table in a sense and get things done, you're going to have the situation where you kind of have to lead them along. So that's where I would say more prep is going to be needed. So your table also, your level of improv skill, as well as your table's ability to either go along with whatever you tell them, or like having to be drug along, like those 2 things, or are they going to make their own story without your intervention if left to their own devices? So if you have, it depends on what kind of group you have, whether or not you can just kind of wing it.
And that always comes down to whether you know your players. Like, yeah. I know the people that come to my table, our table. I know what they're into. I know what they're looking for. And I know how to, as a DM, entertain them. So I don't have to worry about, like, okay, well, if I get combat in, then that's going to make those two players happy. Now, they might be more interested in a dungeon crawl, and there's going to be some of that, later in the game, that it's going to be not possible, but it's there based on what the group decides to do, because plans have already been laid that you want to do X. So like I know that's going to be out there, and that's probably for the rest of you guys. It's going to be like, okay, well, I don't want an entire night that is just a combat slog. So like I sit there and I'm like, all right, well, we're going to have to do with what the prep is put out there for us. So.
All
right, I think we have another question here.
Okay.
Or do you have another thought?
I have another question to go with. So go.
Is that the one from David?
Yes.
Okay. So David wants to know, if I send my party into a freezing mountain or desert environment, how would you represent mechanically the damage that such environments do to a party? So how do you handle that, Nate?
All right. Well, it depends. When it's freezing mountain or desert environment, I would say if they don't have, like a desert environment, if they don't have ample supplies of water or they're heat-sensitive creatures, there's going to be an issue. But like a regular human or like half-elf going into a desert, they're going to have water, or they're going to start taking levels of exhaustion and other problems coming up. If they don't know how to survive in a desert, like they walk around during the day when it's burning them alive, the sun's burning them alive, then that's also going to be, I would give them negatives to saves or constitution saves or something. So I would give them saves for exhaustion rather than just giving it to them. And I would say that's going to eventually lower their finesse, their fitness enough that they're going to be bad at combat. So that's how I would play that rather than just doing hit point damage. You could also say, your max hit point for every level of exhaustion, perhaps your max hit points is down by a tenth or 10, 15%, whatever. That 10% is really easy math. So if they got 32 hit points, just say, well, you got 3 less hit points is your max because of this. And so that's, rather than doing damage, I would say you have cut off max. And for freezing mountains, I would do a very similar thing, levels of exhaustion and like losing maximum your hit points off your maximum. I had a special circumstance in my Spiders from Mars game where the people were actually on a way station in space. So there was a point where the villain was the antagonist of the one shot was drawing arcane energies from the rest of the ship. And what happened was that runes that powered the environment basically allowed people to not be frozen to death due to the killing cold of space. That was going away. So I had them basically every minute, if they didn't have extreme weather clothing on or some other type of protection, and they were going to basically start freezing to death and take levels of exhaustion. And basically, like after 6 or 10 minutes, they would be dead. Because, I mean, we're talking the difference between a freezing mountaintop with like negative 15 degrees with wind chill and, space is a bit different. So that's where I kind of like escalated it. I didn't do hit point damage. As I said, you're taking exhaustion levels per minute and you're going to die at the end if you don't find a way to get around it. And some of them had extreme weather clothing on, and some of them took the suits that were available to the that were from the original crew. And one of the guy who didn't have, some of them actually had elemental resistance to cold and stuff. I was like, they didn't even know this. This just was auspicious that this happened for them. But the last guy had his flame tongue sword by his body as close as possible without burning himself, and just like huddled around like the torch of life for him that was keeping away him from dying. He was still getting cold. He was still taking cold damage, like as if he was in an extreme cold environment, and he was taking exhaustion. He was just getting it slower. So rather than a minute, it was like every 15 minutes he was going to have to deal with that. So nice. Everybody survived, and he only had numb fingers for the final combat rather than being dead.
So my take on how to handle these type of things. I would not have thought about doing the hit point damage, but I would have, number one, all right, have you done your homework? Have you prepped for the environment? So if you're going into a cold, are you dressed in layers? Do you have things to produce heat in some way? Are you knowledgeable in survival and knowledge nature, and going in that direction, or in same thing, like, are you packing extra water to travel in the desert? Are you traveling early morning, late night, and early morning, evening and night, and getting into shade or pocket areas during the high points of the sun, because that's what you have to do when you're traveling in a desert. So if you're doing all of the proper things, I might give you, you know, a low con DC to deal with, and you might suffer ill effects or you might suffer exhaustion, depending upon how bad you fail your save. But if you're not prepared in any way, shape, or form, then you're going to be suffering, checks pretty quickly, and exhaustion kills you with six failed saves. So like you really got to be careful. And unlike other um, other things, like typically it's like, oh well, exhaustion happens because I'm pushing myself. Well, by the time you get to the 5th level of exhaustion, you can't move. So there's nothing really that's going to give you another level of exhaustion because you can't do the work yourself. But if you're in the high point of the sun, lying in a desert, you are cooking, you are baking, that and you're going to have another check. And if you've already got disadvantage on your saves, negatives to stats, and you got to make a check, yeah, you're probably going to fail and die. So don't do that.
Mike Gould brought up a good point about using pennies or using beads or pennies to represent hit points and removing the math and adds the visualization. A player, I do not recall who, what he did was he had beads, like blue ones for water and red ones for food. And basically that was your supply. And it was interesting because everyone could say, all right, like take out your supply and let's see what we've got. So everyone could kind of like pile their food reserves together. And they could also say, well, individually, this is what I'm carrying on me. And as you consumed a meal, like your meal went away. So you were like that much closer to not having food, or that much closer to not having water. And, water is a way more big deal than food is. But that idea that you saw it diminishing as you like were trapped in a dungeon, or you saw it diminishing as you were trying to travel across a desert. And that gave you a good physical representation and visual representation for what you had supplies on, rather just like a number on a page.
All right, so it is 12:59. I don't know if you want to do another one, or do we want to call it here?
Let's see. Do we have any?
There's one more in here that I say.
Is that Jason Sinclair?
Yep.
Okay, I'm getting ready to run Tyranny of Dragons, and one of my players wants to play a Warlock of Tiamat. Would you use the standard Fiend patron, or would you homebrew a more draconic Fiend patron? You could probably just go with the Fiend and just flavor it towards Tiamat. I think everything can work. I mean, Hellish Rebuke is kind of like they get that, don't they? That's like a dragon breath weapon kind of thing. That's I'm trying to think of what they have that I would say wouldn't go with Tiamat, but I think you could just use it as Tiamat, and just maybe they like if they have the mage armor spell, just the one that you can cast it all the time, just say, okay, well it's like you look like you have dragon scales, or you look more scaly or something. So just I would say describe their spells differently, like have them describe their spells, get them into it. So they're doing the work on what their spells look like, but are mechanically the same. So that's where I would go with it for that kind of Tiamat feel, especially if you're using the invocations, the elder invocations or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, whichever ones you pick, like they should be picking dragon-esque kind of things.
So I look at that and I would utterly agree. I think it's much easier to reflavor something that already exists than to try and come up with something that's completely new. Now, a dragon warlock pact I think would be pretty awesome, especially for something like Tiamat, who's the evil queen. But unless you're really into coming up with new archetypes, I think it can be a dangerous road to go down. And what happens if, like, you underpower or overpower what's there? You can create an issue where, oh well, you gave me this weak power. I guess you don't like me or like my character, or if it's overpowered, then why is this character running the game? and ruining the fun for everybody else. So it's always a danger to be in those situations. It's much easier just to say, okay, this is reflavored, it's done, and you can only blame Watts of whether things are balanced or not.
Yeah, it shifts the blame from you to some guy somewhere, which is like what everybody loves to do anyway. So, and great suggestion, Mike Gold, about changing the Warlock of Tiamat to a sorcerer, a draconic sorcerer. If there's unless there's something really about the Warlock that you like mechanically, why not go with a dragon sorcerer?
That works as well. That was an idea that I thought of, and I'm like, well, do we want to go down that road? Because typically, like, I don't completely understand why, but people are like in love with the Warlock in this edition. So,
yeah, you know what? It's because he's got the Warlock has things that nobody else has access to, and they also have that kind of binding arrangements that's kind of cool. They've got baked-in role-playing. They've got interesting mechanics no one else has. They've got a different way of doing spells no one else has. So there's a lot of interesting things about them that is new and exciting compared to the Wizard. But I mean, I like the Wizard. So I mean, the Wizard in this is pretty cool the way they did the schools. So.
All right, so it is past that time. So you guys will get to come hang out with us the rest of the week. Nate and I will be here. We'll answer more questions. We'll figure out different topics to talk about. So you get us for some more time. I don't know exactly when Dave's coming back, whether we'll see him back on Monday or Tuesday of next week. But come hang out with us. So until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.